Welcome to AINdebrief, where we take a look back at the most important aviation stories of the past week by the AIN editors who covered them. I am AIN Alerts editor Chad Troutvetter. In this week's episode, air transport editor Gregory Polek outlines IATA's concerns about having enough cargo infrastructure to quickly transport a COVID-19 vaccine. Washington, D.C. based editor Kerry Lynch explains why and how endangered airports such as East Hampton and Santa Monica could still be saved. Editor-in-Chief Matt Thurber talks about how his curiosity over the term accrued pilot assistance led to an in-depth interview on the Airbus Helicopters H160's flight control system. FBO editor Curt Epstein gives an overview of Sheltair's first Western U.S. based facility that opened this week. And senior editor Charles Alcock celebrates the launch of FutureFlight, AIN's first new product since debuting Business Jet Traveler in 2003. Okay, so Greg, IATA, the International Airline Association, they put out a report this week saying that they're concerned about getting when there is a COVID vaccine, actually having it transported to places where it needs it, right?
Yeah, that's right, Chad. There's a lot of concern about the capacity of the air transport sector to be able to carry all this vaccine to various locations, particularly at a time now that they're so constrained in terms of passenger flying. Of course, a lot of the cargo gets carried in the belly of those passenger airplanes. And so, I mean, right now, less than half of the airplanes that would normally be flying are flying right now. And so it's going to be, I mean, that's just one issue, really. The head of cargo, his name is Glenn Hughes, talked about challenges having to do with lack of available qualified staff, for example. A lot of these guys are that used to work in the cargo departments of the airlines some of their certificates have lapsed, and they need to make sure that there is enough staffing to be able to handle all the vaccine that's going to be going out there.
And also the temperature of the vaccines also a big thing too, right?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the typical vaccine needs to be transported at between 2 degrees Celsius and 8 degrees Celsius, and to keep it at that within that range can be quite an undertaking, particularly given all the volume of these vaccines that are going to be going out. There are almost 8 billion people in the world. It was interesting. Hughes gave the statistic that those vaccines for 8 billion people would fill 8,000 Boeing 747 freighters, and so that gives you a sense of the scale of the undertaking. But and then of course there's also airspace and border closures we're still dealing with, and crew restrictions. It's just if this vaccine does come out by the end of the year, as some epidemiologists are saying it might, it looks like the airline industry, just as it stands now, won't be ready to distribute these things to everybody.
So what is IATA, what's their solution, or what are they saying should be done now to make up for that shortfall?
Yeah, IATA cited the fact that there are 2/3 of the world's commercial aircraft fleet is still grounded, and just the fact that before the COVID outbreak, about half of all cargo flew in passenger planes. So the air cargo industry will really need to do something about the fact that their capacity is down, and rely on things such as ad hoc charter and the use of more passenger airplanes for cargo-only operations. So, for example, there are quite a few airplanes now that have been converted, not converted, but fully, but seats have been taken out and things like that to fly cargo in the passenger compartments. And so they think more of that needs to be done. And then they think a slow resumption of passenger services, specifically to distribute the vaccine to these various destinations, is going to be important too. But as they usually do, they urged governments to work in a consistent manner with each other and with the manufacturing industry and the aviation sector in general, with the restart process. So yeah, I think it's going to be quite a challenge, and they have a lot of work to do if they want to get this done within a couple of months.
Thanks, Greg. So Kerry, this week you listened into a MBAA webinar on airports, and there was some discussion about East Hampton Airport and Santa Monica, which are kind of both slated for closure, I guess, or threatened for closure. And I guess the overall message was it's not too late to save the airports, right?
Right. I did listen into the webinar that was on Tuesday. It was part of the MBA NewsHour. And they had, local airport advocates from both East Hampton or HTO and Santa Monica or SMO discuss the fate of their airports. And they also had a couple of their experts on board just to talk about the whole scheme of airports. Now, those two there's a focus on both of them because they're both pretty busy general aviation facilities, and they both live in communities where there are certain residents that are fairly hostile to the airport and would love to see them closed down. With East Hampton, that is vulnerable to closure in September of 2021. And the reason why is because they do not have any more grant assurance agreement obligations after that point. So when you take a grant from the federal government, and most airports are funded through federal grants, you have to keep the facility open and running as a viable entity for 20 years from the date of that grant. So East Hampton, which has not been, the town has not been in favor of the airport, has not accepted federal grants to give them this option. And many indicate this is what their plans would be. And Santa Monica, it's a slightly different case where Santa Monica is actually obligated in perpetuity to continue running as an airport, but city officials and local residents have gotten support of federal lawmakers and local lawmakers, and there's been lawsuits, and it finally hit a head where they started working with FAA through Congress, and FAA, and I think it was 2017, came to an agreement that will free Santa Monica from obligations that they run the airport in perpetuity. And why it's different for Santa Monica is it was a facility that the federal government had taken over during World War II, and after the government was done with it, they transferred it back to the city. Any of these facilities that got transferred back the city was able to take control of it again, with the understanding it would remain an airport forever. Now, so there's been some really active campaigns to close these airports from residents who just don't like aircraft or aircraft noise. And in Santa Monica in particular, it's in an area where there isn't a lot of land. So that airport is very, very valuable to the city for redevelopment. And there's also external pressures in Santa Monica. The whole state of California has come up with these determinations of how many low-income housing each municipality has to have. And Santa Monica has to produce thousands. And there isn't a lot of areas to develop such properties where that airport property could be one potential place for it. So there's a lot of factors. It's not just noise, it's the value of the land that would be against keeping it open. But the message this week from the airport advocates, I mean, it's well known the opposition and the fights over these airports is it's not over yet. There is still time, and we still have to do everything we can to convince city council, to sway local opinion, to be good neighbors. And at East Hampton, for instance, they just came up with new procedures to make aircraft noise less concentrated over residents. I mean, you still have to fly over residents to get to the airport because it's not exactly on the water. But, they're doing what they can, and they don't want people to give up hope. In Santa Monica, for instance, there have been some city leaders who've kind of given the impression, apparently, that it is a fait accompli, that the airport's going to close down no matter what. And their message is, we still have a good 8 years. This airport is still busy. We still have 80,000 ops a year. And even though they shorten the runway, light jets are still getting in and they are flying. The mix has changed a bit. So they're not willing to give up hope.
Okay. So, Matt, you read a story about the Airbus H160, which is Airbus's new twin helicopter, and you were reading a story that was written by Mark Huber, and it mentioned accrued pilot assistance, and it wasn't well explained in the story, and you decided to find out more about that. And so, what happened when you did that?
Yeah, it kind of struck me, Chad, accrued pilot assistance. I wonder what that is. And I knew this was a new helicopter that was just certified, and it's going to enter service this year. And I wanted to know more about what that term meant and how it helps pilots. So I contacted Airbus Helicopters and asked about it, and ended up with a terrific interview with test pilot Olivier Jeance, who was instrumental in helping design the automatic flight control system for the H160.
So what did you find out? What is accrued pilot assistance, and how does that work in the flight control system regime?
Basically, it means that the autopilot is on all the time, from takeoff to landing and in between, and you don't shut it off. In fact, the helicopter is designed so that the pilot can't shut the autopilot off and just fly in manual, or as some helicopter pilots call it, wet noodle mode, which is just directly controlling the helicopter with the flight controls. It's just really not designed to do that. It's a dual autopilot, and designed such that a failure of both autopilots is extremely unlikely. And it's kind of like a step closer to fly-by-wire without doing fly-by-wire.
So does that mean it has all the safety parameters, all that a fly-by-wire aircraft would have? You can only fly within certain parameters. You can't fly out of that. Is that kind of how this works then?
That's a good question, Chad. So the H160 does offer so-called envelope protection, but it's not really the same as envelope protection that I've seen on other aircraft, where when you get to a certain point, it nudges you back inside the envelope, or prevents you from stalling by pushing the nose down, prevents you from going too fast by pulling the nose up. It's more like it's constantly there helping you fly within the proper parameters. And if for some reason you got into a situation where you're losing control, it's still going to help you regain control. Like the only situation that it can't handle is something where it just physically impossible to recover from. But no pilot would be able to do that anyway. For example, it also, like a lot of modern autopilots, has a recovery button which you can push. And if you're in the air cruising along and you are losing control, you push the recovery button and it comes back to straight and level. If you're down near the ground hovering and you have a brownout or whiteout situation where you just can't see anymore and you need some help, you click the recovery button twice. It's on the cyclic for easy access, and it puts you into an automatic hover so you can figure out how to deal with the situation.
It's not a fly-by-wire. Why do they decide to do this with a manual flight control system versus fly-by-wire? Do they explain what the reasoning is?
Yeah, fly-by-wire is incredibly expensive, and although it is available in helicopters, the first civil fly-by-wire helicopter flight control system is going to be certified hopefully soon in the Bell 525, but it really isn't something that helicopter manufacturers have done a lot with and have a lot of experience with. It's far less expensive to use the dual autopilots to make the helicopter do what you want to do. And the reason for doing this is not just to make the pilot's job easier, which it does, but also it allows you to add a lot of extra features that make the helicopter safer. For example, it's got an automatic takeoff feature. You can just go ahead and let it do the takeoff for you, and it'll fly within the required parameters for a twin-engine helicopter. For example, if you lose an engine on takeoff, it will stay within the parameters without you having to do a bunch of calculations to figure out whether or not you can do it. It also has a super neat, unique feature that's new in helicopters, and that's a vortex alerting system that warns you if you're about to get into a vortex ring state, which is extremely dangerous. It constantly monitors the performance of the helicopter to determine if you're about to enter a vortex ring state, and gives you a warning seconds before it happens so that you can try to recover before it's too late.
Do they have any estimate of how much safer, this will make flying helicopters, and do they expect to filter this down to their smaller models as well?
Well, some of the features are going to be filtered to other models, like the vortex ring state alerting system. Definitely. They're going to probably bring that to the H175 and H145. But one of the real key benefits is reducing the training burden on the helicopter pilot who's transitioning into the H160. Now, it's not going to lower the initial training requirements because they don't want to go that route, but it's going to be easier for the pilot to transition into the H160, and it reduces the pilot's workload. And that's a huge benefit because every time there's an aircraft accident, one of the principal reactions from experts and pundits is, oh, the pilot needed more training on how to do this specific thing to prevent the accident. What if you could design the aircraft so that you don't just have to keep adding training requirements for every single little thing that could go wrong? And that's what they've accomplished with the H160. Are
you planning on flying the helicopter when they bring it around, Matt?
Absolutely. If I can get a chance to fly it, I'd love to. I've flown some interesting Garmin helicopter autopilots, the G600H earlier this year, and it actually has some similar features as far as helping the pilot. It's not full time. You can turn it off if you want, but when I left the autopilot on, I could fly the helicopter, which is a Airbus A-Star, perfectly well, even though I only have a few hours of helicopter time and I'm not helicopter rated. But I flew it from takeoff to touchdown with fairly good precision. I could put it right on a helipad, and it was pretty amazing. So I'm looking forward to trying out the technology in the H160.
That should be interesting to see what happens when it comes in a service. Thanks, Matt. Sheltair opened up their first West Coast U.S. FBO in Colorado. So tell us about that, Curt. When did they open, and what did they open?
Well, it's west, not West Coast, but Western, and it's their first FBO west of the Mississippi. Sheltair has always been an East Coast FBO. They're headquartered down in Florida, and they've got facilities going up the coast through New York. And they surprised a lot of people when they announced 2 years ago they were going into Rocky Mountain Municipal Airport in the Denver metropolitan area. They surprised a lot of people with that announcement in Broomfield, Colorado. So they opened last year at a temporary facility, and they became the second service provider there at the airport. And this week they held the grand opening for their new permanent facility, and it's supposedly very stunning. It has about a 10,400 square foot terminal, 17 feet high, sheathed in glass. On the inside, it's got local materials, pine, stone, exposed iron, all to kind of evoke that Colorado environment. And it also has a 31,000 square foot hangar that can accommodate the largest big business jets, with about 4,400 square feet of attached office space. So it's really a striking facility, and the most visible thing about it is this huge arrivals canopy. It's about 162 feet wide, arches up from the building. It's got the Sheltair name in neon on the front of it, so it's obviously a very eye-catching thing, which will protect arriving aircraft and passengers from the inclement weather out there.
This is the second FBO on the field, so it breaks monopoly, right?
Yeah, it was Signature had lone service provider there, and now they have two, so there'll be competition. And the facility is open now, and they're expecting to welcome ski area traffic, which is going to be coming up starting, I guess, around November, as soon as they start getting snow there. So they'll be well suited and fully operational in their new home, and they're looking forward to serving that segment of the community.
Yeah, so how many facilities does Sheltair have now? And they're mostly concentrated in the East Coast, a lot in Florida, right?
Yeah, they are based in Florida, and they have facilities going up through Georgia, and then they have a concentration in New York. They have the lone FBO at John F. Kennedy International Airport, and all the other at LaGuardia Airport as well, and then some out on Long Island. So this will be their 18th facility. Their 18th facility in the U.S. They're only a U.S.-based company.
Anything else you want to talk about Sheltair?
Well, it's a family-owned company. They Jerry Holland, who was the company founder and the president and CEO, recently named his daughter Lisa Holland as president. So it's obviously has a succession in there, and it's going to remain in family hands. And it's doing very well in its FBO and aviation real estate businesses.
Okay, great. Thanks, Curt. So, Charlie, AIN launched its first new product since Business Jet Traveler back in October 2003, and it's called FutureFlight. So, tell us about that.
Well, yes, this is a project that we've had in the works for, to be honest, a bit over a year now. And the idea is that we're creating a dedicated resource to provide information about new aviation technology and new aviation business models. And you might well say, why do we need a separate platform for that? Don't you already cover that at AIN? Well, yes, we do. But we have reached a point in the industry's history where there is just such an extraordinary depth of new innovation going on in areas such as electric aircraft and other new types of propulsion and autonomous flight controls and so on, that we felt this area demanded its own platform. And the thing that's a little bit different from the main AIN website is it's not just about posting news and stories, although we certainly do that. FutureFlight.aero also includes a fully searchable database of the main new aircraft programs and the new propulsion systems and the other technologies that support that. And so we're constantly researching and updating all the players involved in this and kind of tracking how they're doing.
So is this more of a database, the news outlet then?
It's really both. It is a database, but having said that, it has a news channel too, and we're posting fresh stories daily. But the point is, behind those stories, the readers and subscribers can click and get far more specific information on each program and each company and some of the key people involved in those. So, you know, it's kind of like a directory come searchable database, but the front end is still very much a news site. And in the great AIN tradition, everything that we do is staunchly independent. So we're not just there to recycle, the propaganda that's coming out of this sector. There's a heck of a lot of hype, as everybody knows. We're independently researching these programs, and we're challenging them to prove that the claims that they're making are credible. And we're fact checking everything that they say.
So what are you covering specifically then?
Well, a lot of the coverage that we've prepared over the past year or so, it won't surprise you to hear, has focused on the new eVTOL aircraft, the electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft, many of which are being developed for what's loosely being called urban air mobility. But to be honest, the sector's morphing and changing all the time. So although that's still a big part of it, we're also tracking fixed-wing aircraft programs that might use electric power or potentially hydrogen propulsion instead. We're tracking all the different applications of autonomous flight technology. And even the term urban air mobility has kind of moved on. You know, the mental picture you have of that is very small eVTOL aircraft moving people around cities. It now seems more and more likely that some of the early adopters of electric aviation are actually going to be operating in far more varied ways, including regional airline services potentially, and providing emergency medical support to out-of-town communities. And so the scope of what we're covering at FutureFlight is really much, much broader than some of the sites that are just completely fixated on eVTOL aircraft.
And you have commentary in there too, right?
Yes, we do. Of course, we strictly separate that. We have news stories, we have the searchable database that I mentioned. But yes, we are also providing independent commentary that, we think provides a fair-minded, accurate assessment of the context in which you should see all these big, bold claims that people are making. And in some cases, through our On the Radar section, we post other people's opinions and research, and we provide a commentary on that. And so our hope is that this is one place that people who are interested in new aviation technology and new aviation business models can go and get an objective, fair-minded assessment of everything that's going on in one place.
Well, that brings me to who's the targeted reader/subscriber?
Yeah, that's also shifted too. It's funny, when we first started planning this more than a year ago, I think a big group of people that we had in our mind's eye were prospective investors in new aviation programs. So, venture capital people and private equity people who we figured had a big interest potentially in investing in aviation, but perhaps didn't have the background knowledge that they might need to make good discernment in where to put their money. So that's very much part of the target audience. But what's interested us is that we've seen there's enormous interest from within the aviation sector itself. So many established names in aerospace, people like Honeywell and BAE Systems and many others, Boeing and Airbus, are really targeting more and more of their energy and their research and development work on these new technologies. And they seem to have a huge interest in it as well. So it's both an old and a new readership. And significantly, I forgot to mention this is a subscription-based model for AIN. So We are asking people to make paid subscriptions to receive this information. And of course, this just lifts the bar for us to provide even more exclusive and well-researched information. And it's very exciting indeed.
And I also planners and infrastructure people from governments too could also be interested in the subscriptions too, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. And actually, so much of the infrastructure that's going to support these new ways of operating aircraft, and by the way, some people are now using the term advanced air mobility instead of urban air mobility, but so much of that comes down to what the state and national and city authorities will permit. And there's a whole sort of ranch of infrastructure planners and legal experts who need to look at this, because we're talking about using aircraft in radically new ways. So the old models of just, buy an aircraft, set up an operation, buy a hangar at an airport just don't fit this.
So it's paid subscription, but you can also get a free trial, right?
Yes, you can. Absolutely. You can try before you buy. You can sign up at futureflight.aero and you'll be able to access the news and the database. And every week, early on Thursday, we put out a newsletter, which will, draw your attention to what we think are the most significant bits of breaking information in any given week.
Okay, great. Thanks for the info, Charlie. Thanks for listening to AINdebrief. Another podcast episode will air next Friday. In the meantime, go to www.ainonline.com for the latest aviation news from AIN.